Ibrahim Traore's rejection of Air France's return to Burkina Faso is a stark symbol of the country's ongoing political turmoil. Traoré, a relatively unknown military figure, ascended to power in a September 2022 coup, ousting the previous junta leader. This dramatic power grab marked another chapter in Burkina Faso's struggle for stability amidst a growing jihadist insurgency. Traoré's decision to bar Air France, a move rooted in security concerns and escalating tensions with former colonial power France, has further isolated the West African nation. Air France initially suspended flights to Burkina Faso due to the deteriorating security situation. The country has witnessed a surge in violence perpetrated by Islamist militants, leading to widespread instability and displacement. Traoré, citing ongoing security risks and a desire to assert national sovereignty, has refused to allow Air France's return. This decision has significant implications for Burkina Faso's international relations, particularly with France, and raises questions about the country's trajectory under Traoré's leadership. The rejection of Air France also reflects a broader trend of declining relations between Burkina Faso and France. Traoré's government, echoing sentiments expressed by segments of the population, views France's continued presence as a form of neo-colonialism. They argue that France has failed to adequately address the security crisis and continues to interfere in Burkina Faso's internal affairs. The expulsion of the French ambassador and the termination of military agreements are further signs of the deepening rift between the two nations. In this context, Traoré's decision to bar Air France is both symbolic and strategic. It underscores his government's determination to chart an independent course and prioritize national interests, even if it means alienating traditional allies. However, this stance carries considerable risks. Burkina Faso, grappling with a multifaceted crisis, can ill afford to become further isolated. The international community, particularly regional actors like ECOWAS, must engage with Traoré's government to address the security and humanitarian challenges facing the country. The decline in Burkina Faso-France relations has coincided with a noticeable pivot towards Russia. This shift is evident in Traoré's foreign policy overtures and the growing Russian presence in the country. In July 2023, Traoré visited Moscow seeking closer ties with the Kremlin and exploring potential military cooperation. This visit, coming at a time of heightened tensions with the West, signaled Traoré's willingness to engage with alternative partners in addressing Burkina Faso's security challenges. Russia, eager to expand its influence in Africa, has been receptive to Traoré's advances. The Kremlin views Burkina Faso as a strategically important country in the Sahel region, a hotbed of jihadist activity and geopolitical competition. Russia has reportedly deployed mercenaries from the Wagner Group, a private military company with close ties to the Russian government, to assist Burkina Faso in its fight against Islamist insurgents. This growing Russian footprint, while potentially bolstering security forces in the short term, raises concerns about human rights abuses and long-term stability. The burgeoning relationship between Burkina Faso and Russia has further strained ties with France. Paris views Moscow's involvement in the Sahel with suspicion, seeing it as a destabilizing force that undermines French interests in the region. The presence of Russian mercenaries accused of human rights violations in other African countries has also drawn condemnation from human rights groups and Western governments. The escalating rivalry between France and Russia in Burkina Faso risks exacerbating existing tensions and complicating efforts to address the country's multifaceted crisis. Burkina Faso's diplomatic balancing act between France and Russia reflects the complex geopolitical landscape of the Sahel. Traoré's government, seeking to navigate this challenging terrain, is pursuing a pragmatic approach aimed at securing the resources and support needed to combat the jihadist insurgency and stabilize the country. However, this strategy carries significant risks. Aligning too closely with Russia could further isolate Burkina Faso from traditional Western partners and entrench the country in a new Cold War dynamic. The deteriorating security situation and political instability in Burkina Faso have been accompanied by a worrying crackdown on media freedom and human rights. Traoré's government, facing mounting criticism over its handling of the crisis, has increasingly resorted to repressive measures to silence dissent and control the narrative. Independent media outlets and journalists have been targeted, with several instances of intimidation, harassment, and arbitrary arrests. In April 2024, Burkina Faso suspended the BBC and VOA, accusing them of spreading fake news and undermining national security. This move came after the broadcasters aired reports alleging extrajudicial killings of civilians by the Burkinabe army, allegations corroborated by human rights groups. The suspension of these international media outlets drew widespread condemnation, with press freedom organizations denouncing it as a blatant attempt to stifle independent reporting and critical voices. The government's crackdown on the media is part of a broader pattern of human rights violations. Security forces have been accused of carrying out extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detentions, and enforced disappearances, particularly in areas affected by the conflict. Human rights groups have documented numerous cases of abuses targeting civilians, often on the basis of their ethnicity or perceived allegiance to armed groups. The government's failure to address these violations and hold perpetrators accountable has fostered a climate of impunity and fear. The erosion of media freedom and human rights in Burkina Faso is a deeply concerning trend. A free and independent press is essential for holding power to account, exposing abuses, and fostering public debate. Similarly, respect for human rights is fundamental to a just and stable society. The international community must press Traoré's government to reverse its repressive policies, ensure accountability for human rights violations, and create an environment conducive to freedom of expression and the rule of law. The combined effects of the security crisis, political instability, and human rights violations have plunged Burkina Faso into a dire humanitarian crisis. Years of conflict have displaced nearly 2 million people within the country, creating a massive humanitarian emergency. These internally displaced persons face dire living conditions in overcrowded camps and informal settlements, often lacking access to basic necessities like food, water, sanitation, and healthcare. The humanitarian situation is further compounded by the deteriorating security environment, which hinders access for aid organizations and limits their ability to deliver essential services to those in need. The presence of armed groups and the risk of attacks make it dangerous for humanitarian workers to operate in certain areas, leaving many vulnerable populations without assistance. The international community's response to the crisis has been inadequate, with funding for humanitarian aid falling short of the needs on the ground. Adding to the complexity of the situation is Burkina Faso's withdrawal from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. This decision, taken by Traoré's government in response to regional pressure to restore constitutional order, further isolates the country and raises concerns about its regional integration and stability. ECOWAS has imposed sanctions on Burkina Faso, demanding a return to democratic rule and a clear timeline for elections. Burkina Faso's withdrawal from ECOWAS has significant implications for the country's political and economic future. It cuts off a vital source of support and risks further destabilizing the region. The African Union has also suspended Burkina Faso's membership, adding to the country's isolation. The international community must engage in constructive dialogue with Traoré's government, urging it to address the root causes of the crisis, restore constitutional order, and re-engage with regional